All right, well, welcome to part 8. Now we've kind of crossed an important threshold. So we've looked at all of the evidence that the Masoretic text is corrupt. We've looked at the motive. We have looked at a lot of different pieces of evidence for the end times deceptions and so on. So again, if you want further study, I highly recommend those series I mentioned, my end times series and the Great Delusion series, to really see how all of this is shaping up, because it's truly profound. But now we want to look at the actual alphabet of Hebrew and how it's related to this whole kabbalistic magical thing that's going on. Now, besides all of that evidence that proves that the Septuagint is a superior translation and the Masoretic text is corrupt, textual corruption, there's also the fact that modern Hebrew is not real Hebrew. It's fake. It's a counterfeit. Real Hebrew today is referred to as Proto-Sinaitic script or Paleo-Hebrew. And we're going to read about that in just a little bit. So here is from Wikipedia. This is Proto-Sinaitic script, and you can see what it looks like. And it says the Proto-Sinaitic script is a Middle Bronze Age writing system known for small corpus of about 30 to 40 inscriptions and fragments from Serabit el-Qadim and the Sinai Peninsula, as well as 2 inscriptions from Wadi el-Hol in Middle Egypt. Together with about 20 known Proto-Canaanite inscriptions, it is also known as Early Alphabetic, the earliest trace of alphabetic writing and the common ancestor of both the ancient South Arabian script and the Phoenician alphabet, which led to many modern alphabets, including the Greek alphabet. According to common theory, Canaanites or Hyksos who spoke a Canaanite language repurposed Egyptian hieroglyphs to construct a different script. Egypt had its hieroglyphs, so you have to understand that these people were all in contact with one another, and the Hebrews and the Israelites were in Egypt for quite a while. Of course, they weren't there for 400 years like we looked at previously, but they were there for enough time to take, their customs and their alphabets and so on. So out of the Exodus, you had the Hebrews and the Israelites became their own nation, so they needed their own language and their own way of writing. And of course, what was familiar? Well, Egypt. So they created a pictographic type of alphabet, and this is where it came from. The earliest Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions are mostly dated between the mid-19th century and the mid-16th, late century BC. The principal debate is between an early date around 1850 BC and a date around 1550 BC. The choice of one or the other dates decides whether it is Proto-Sinaitic or Proto-Canaanite, and by extension locates the invention of the alphabet in Egypt or Canaan, respectively. So who knows exactly how it happened, but we can trace these things pretty early on. However, the discovery of the 2 Wadi el-Hol inscriptions near the Nile River suggests that the script originated in Egypt. The evolution of Proto-Sinaitic and small number of Proto-Canaanite inscriptions from the Bronze Age is based on rather scant epigraphic evidence. It is only with the Bronze Age collapse and the rise of the new Semitic kingdoms in the Levant that Proto-Canaanite is clearly attested in various places. And it tells you some things there. Now, I want to see if they have... You see, here's what it looks like. If we can just click on this picture. Here's what it looked like, right? It's very pictographic, meaning the symbols represent pictures of things, kind of like early Chinese and so on. Which, fun fact, early Chinese, here's the alphabet, but early Chinese has, you can look into this. Gosh, it's such an interesting, totally off topic, but very, very fascinating presentation. God in Ancient China, look it up. There's a man, I forget his name, but he preaches this message with showing how the ancient Chinese were monotheists, and they believed very likely in the God of the Bible, and their whole alphabet was structured around the narrative of Genesis. The various pictograms that they used all represented facts from Genesis, with the fall, with the 2 people, with so on and so forth. So fascinating thing. But these pictographic things were very common throughout the ancient world. This is what it looks like. You can see these various, pictures. This is the hieroglyph that it came from, and the various evolutions that it came from and what it meant. So you see, they're pictures. The way these pictographs work, so you understand, they're pictures of a particular concept that was pronounced a certain way, and so based on that, so for example, this one is bait, which came from bet, or house. So house is bait, meaning this letter represents b, because it reminds you of bait, which starts with a B. So it's a pictogram, but the pictogram is designed to act almost like a sound cue. Does that make sense? So the B is bait because bait is house, and house starts, in this case, bait with a B. That's why the letter is bait. So it's because it's a pictogram of a house. So this is how it works, and it's very different than what modern Hebrew, quote unquote Hebrew, uses. Okay, let's look at the next one. This is Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. And of course, here's the script, what it looks like. This is the true Hebrew. These various characters and pictograms, and of course, they come from these older alphabets. The Paleo-Hebrew script, also Paleo-Hebrew, Proto-Hebrew, or Old Hebrew, is the writing system found in the Canaanite and Aramaic inscriptions, including pre-biblical and biblical Hebrew from southern Canaan, also known as the biblical kingdoms of Israel, which is Samaria and Judah. It is considered to be the script used to record the original text of the Bible due to its similarity to the Samaritan script. The Talmud states that the Samaritans still use this script. The Talmud described it as the Livona script, translated by some as Lebanon script. However, it also has been suggested that the name is a corrupted form of Neapolitan, of Nablus. Use of the term Paleo-Hebrew alphabet is due to a 1954 suggestion by Solomon Birnbaum, who argued that to apply the term Phoenician from the northern Canaanite Lebanon region to the script of the Hebrews, which is from the southern Canaan, today's Israel-Palestine, is hardly suitable. The Paleo-Hebrew and Phoenician alphabets are two slight regional variants of the same script. So again, you had Proto-Sinaitic, which led to the Phoenician and Hebrew alphabets and so on. All these things are related, but you can see the evolution of language if we just look at, for example, the pictures. This is a photograph of a section of 10th century stone. See? I mean, you can kind of tell, but the markings are very, very different. They're pictographic. Here's a ring, I believe, a signet ring, Jerusalem, city of David. I don't know how old this ring is, but it's certainly probably, like 10th century, something like that. So you can see this is what it looks like. And if you're listening to this, then, look this up. You can look up Paleo-Hebrew. You can look up what it looks there. Very different than quote-unquote modern Hebrew. Very, very different situation. Use in the Israelite kingdoms. The Paleo-Hebrew alphabet was in common use in the kingdoms of Israel and Judah throughout the 8th and 7th centuries BC. During the 6th century BC, oh snap, it crashed for some stupid reason. Let's go back. During the 6th century BC, the time of the Babylonian exile, important, the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet was gradually replaced by the use of the Imperial Aramaic alphabet. Keep that in mind. The letters of the Imperial Aramaic were given shapes characteristic for writing Hebrew during the Second Temple period, developing into the square shape of the Hebrew alphabet. Keep all of this in mind, folks. The Samaritans, who remained in the land of Israel, continued to use their variant of the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet, called the Samaritan script. After the fall of the Persian Empire, Jews used both scripts before settling on the Assyrian form, i.e. the Aramaic square script, which is the basis for the quote-unquote modern Hebrew today. This is an old scroll of, I believe it's a part of Deuteronomy. It's called the Ketef Hinnom scroll. And you can discern. Now look at, they put the actual modern Hebrew next to it. Look at the differences. Two totally different alphabets. Very, very different. And of course, there's a reason for that. This is the Imer Bula. It's another thing that was found around the 7th or 6th century. They date it. So again, very old, and you can see that the alphabet was very different. Original Hebrew was very different. It had certain characteristics that made it very different. This is a coin from the Bar Kokhba revolt, which is also very interesting because the Bar Kokhba revolt was like in the 2nd century, I believe, 140 AD or 110, something like that. But let's see what this coin looks like. You can see they have some original Paleo-Hebrew. Of course, some of the pronunciations, we'll talk about this in another place, like with the sacred name controversy. The pronunciation of the sacred name, by the time the Second Temple was destroyed, practically nobody knew how to pronounce it anymore. Because you had other things like this happening, with the language changing, with the Jews being judged by these various empires and so on and so forth, and their alphabet changing. Why do you keep crashing? That's really funny. Okay, anyway, this is the word Hebrew. written in modern Hebrew alphabet and in Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. So they're generous enough to give us a comparison. So here's the two. Here's real Hebrew and here's counterfeit Hebrew. Of course, they read it the other way around, I believe. But anyway, so this is the difference between these two alphabets. Very, very different. And of course, once we talk about other aspects of the modern Hebrew alphabet, you'll see that they are quite different. This is the Samaritan script, where you can tell it's very, very different. Of course, this has its own evolution too, which is interesting. Can I do this? Okay. So there's that. All right, one more here. I believe we have the list of Hebrew manuscripts. That's right. A Hebrew Bible manuscript is a handwritten copy of a portion of the text of the Hebrew Bible, made by papyrus, parchment, or paper, and written in a Hebrew language. Some of the biblical text annotations may be in Aramaic. The oldest manuscripts were written in a form of a scroll. The medieval manuscripts usually were written in the form of a codex. The late manuscripts written after the 9th century used the Masoretic text. The important manuscripts are associated with Aaron ben Asher, who, remember, they weren't Karaite Jews, they were mystics, especially the Leningrad Codex, which you can see that's got a nice little Kabbalah 6-pointed star right on the cover, and you're going to learn what that is. That's a magic sigil. But this is the Leningrad Codex of the portions of Exodus, so you can look at it. See, the Hebrew is very different. Suddenly looks very different. It's got little squiggles on the top. It's got dots. It's got lines. It's got these little crowns that are very meaningful things. They're esoteric things that you'll learn about. Moving on. The earliest sources, whether oral or written, of the Hebrew Bible disappeared over time because of the fragility of the media. Wars, especially the destruction of the First and Second Temple, and other intentional destructions. As a result, the lapse of time between the original manuscripts and their surviving copies is much longer than in the case of the New Testament manuscripts. That's right, folks. You need to understand that there's no such thing as a consistent line of, like Hebrew from, Moses all the way to the modern day, quote unquote, state of Israel and Jews that claim to have, connection all the way to Moses. There's no such thing. There have been so many dispersions and crazy things that have happened that there is no such thing. So a little history review for you as we get into this. Around 720 BC, you had the Assyrians judge Israel. And of course, that is when Aramaic began to become the, language of the Middle East. That was the universal language that everybody started to adopt. And of course, it comes with the Aramaic alphabet, which was very square-shaped. In around 597 BC, the Babylonians judge Israel, and Aramaic becomes solidified. Of course, the Jews get captured. They get taken to Babylon. They have to be there for 70 years, and that becomes part of their culture, and they start using the Aramaic alphabet. By the 4th century BC, we have like 336 to around 323 BC, you had Alexander the Great. He takes over the modern world, and everything becomes Hellenized through Greek culture, through Plato's understanding of the immortal soul, through Greek language, and so on and so forth. Then you have Jews that basically grow up generationally speaking Greek, and they don't speak Hebrew anymore. Paleo-Hebrew is not being written down anymore. And so that's why the Septuagint filled the void, because people needed the scriptures. And that's why the Septuagint is the best that we have in terms of the original scriptures. But then again, 200 years later, approximately, you had, the Rome conquering Greece and conquering everybody else. So Rome took over. So you had successive, and of course, Rome used Latin, and they had their own thing going on. And you had successive pagan dispersions of the Jews and conquering everybody, and many significant events that ultimately led to the loss of the original Hebrew and a lot of shifts happening. Hellenization took over the Middle East right after, Babylon and Assyria, and basically made everybody speak Greek. By 300 BC, the original Hebrew was not used anymore as a main language, whether you were writing or speaking it. You had the temple priests who were basically understanding these things, and of course special situations, even like the Bar Kokhba revolt, you saw they put some Paleo-Hebrew. So people were using it for very special things, but Paleo-Hebrew was not used anymore by the 3rd century BC. By 70 AD, only the temple elites used Hebrew and knew how to pronounce the sacred name. People used Aramaic and Greek. That's what people spoke. That's what people spoke to one another. Jesus spoke Aramaic and Greek. That's why, again, when people look at the New Testament, it says Jesus. That's the Greek version of Joshua, of Yeshua. So all the sacred name people who are all about, you got to say Yeshua or Yehoshua or Yeshua, you have to realize that people called Jesus Jesus, and the people who wrote the New Testament wrote down Jesus. So if you're going to be legalistic about pronunciation, then you might as well learn Koine Greek perfectly and pronounce Jesus, because that's what it says. But either way, after 70 AD, you had a couple of other things develop, obviously with rabbinic Judaism. And by 200 AD, you had the Mishnah Torah, which is the oral Torah, was first written down. And this was written in Mishnaic Hebrew, which we'll look at a little bit later, which was a precursor to this kabbalistic modern Hebrew that the Jews use today. But they've been I want you to realize that they've been working on this for many centuries. It's not something that just happened with the Masoretes or happened overnight. This has been a progressive thing as a result of the development of rabbinic Judaism, which goes back to Babylon and all the traditions they picked up there from the pagans, from the mystery religion. But around 500 AD, you had the Gemara, which was written down, which is a commentary on the Mishnah, which is the oral Torah. And it was also written down in Mishnaic Hebrew, which again, it's kind of like a transitory form between what you have today, which is Masoretic kabbalistic Hebrew, and kind of the Aramaic Hebrew that was being, before that, between all these empires that were basically conquering everybody, that the Jews had to have some sort of way of writing things down. So, a little bit about the Gemara that I want you to know. This is from Your Jewish Journey, BJE. I don't know what BJE stands for. Maybe Be Jewish and Be Exciting or something. I don't know. .org. And let's see. It talks about the Gemara. And it says, when you look at a page of the Talmud today, you will find the Hebrew text of the Mishnah is featured in the middle of the page. Interspersed around the Hebrew of the Mishnah are explanations in Aramaic, which are called the Gemara. So it's written in Aramaic. The Aramaic word Gemara means tradition. In Hebrew, the word Gemara means completion. Indeed, the Gemara is a compilation of the various rabbinic discussions of the Mishnah, and as such completes the understanding of the Mishnah. Here's a page from the Talmud, and you can see what it looks like. We can zoom in. You can't really tell too much, but you see, it's got these little crowns and characteristics, and it's got all this stuff going on that has nothing to do with the original Hebrew. Gemara, Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud was redacted in the year 500 CE by Ravina and Rav Ashi, two leaders of the Babylonian Jewish community. The language of the Talmud is Aramaic, in Hebrew script. What does that even mean? I wonder. It contains explanations of the Mishnah, legislation, customs, case histories, and moral exhortations. The Gemara is a synopsis of the discussions, questions, and decisions of the Babylonian academies, in which the Mishnah was studied for more than 300 years. So, very interesting to understand that by 500 AD, when the Gemara was written, or Gemara, however it's pronounced, you already started to have this new alphabet going on, which was they basically took Aramaic, and you'll see other things, they basically took Aramaic and modified it in various ways. So what's the point? Well, the point is that there were historical and political changes that forced the Jews to use a different alphabet than they were using. The original Hebrew that the scriptures were written in by Moses, by other prophets and scribes at that time, is not the Hebrew of today. There's not been a consistent succession of that same alphabet. It's a totally different alphabet. And of course, things change. Even English, for example, if you understand linguistics and history, even English has changed, and the script for English has changed, and the words and the spelling for certain things have changed. This is natural for any language. However, the changes that have happened, English has not become an occult, esoteric language that is used with certain markings to create sigils and spells. This is an important point. Original Paleo-Hebrew was a pictographic language. They didn't have numbers for letters. They didn't have esoteric meanings. It was just a pictographic language. There's a lot of pictographic languages. In fact, pictographic languages are actually very effective because they can, visually portray something very efficiently. But that's the point. The point is that Masoretic Hebrew is a magical alphabet. You're going to learn what that is today, hopefully. By the way, there was historical and political changes that forced the Jews to use a different alphabet. The rabbinic system, in response to Christianity, in response to all these different things that happened, had to maintain itself. And of course, the mystics took over. All the rabbis that rejected Christ and wanted to go their own way, like Cain, they created rabbinic Judaism. And they hijacked Aramaic and they used it for their own purposes. They modified it, as you'll see. Kabbalism and kabbalistic principles created basically a special esoteric alphabet. And that started a very long time ago with people like Rabbi Akiva, as you'll soon see. So this was only pushed further and further with developments after the cross, with Christianity kind of flourishing and so on, which of course motivated even more rebellion and subversion in the people who rejected Christ and the Pharisee system. You have to understand that Jesus read out of the Septuagint. And we call it the Septuagint, but he read out of the scriptures. There was no Hebrew scrolls at that time. People were reading out of the Septuagint. It was translated Greek translations and Aramaic translations and so on. So Jesus did not read out of the Masoretic text. They didn't have Masoretic Hebrew or Mishnaic Hebrew at that time. Also, Jesus spoke Aramaic and Greek. The apostles were all named after Greek names. Philip, Paul, Peter. These were all Greek names, and they all used the Septuagint. So very likely that the Septuagint is the closest thing that we have to the original scriptures. It's far superior in terms of its information, and it's the one that everybody quoted. So obviously, that's the source, that is the true source, and the Masoretic text is a corruption. Remember also other important history after 70 AD. There were two more revolts, the Bar Kokhba revolt and the, I forget the other one, but anyway, the Jews basically revolted two more times within a period of like 150 years. And they got dispersed and really, really dispersed this time. And of course, that led to all sorts of things being destroyed, records being lost. This is why, again, like I say in my documentary, Why the Jews Are Not God's Chosen People, like you had all these revolts and dispersions. You had 70 AD, then you had the two other revolts by, I think, 150 AD. You had two more revolts where the Jews are just decimated and dispersed. Remember that in the 2nd century BC, the Edomites were converted, and the Edomites were the mortal enemies of the Jews, yet they were converted to Judaism. Then the 8th century AD, you had the Khazars who were converted, and they were just pagan Turks that were converted to Judaism. Then 2 centuries later, around the 10th and 11th, about the 11th century, you had the Crusades. And of course, if you know what the Crusaders did, everywhere they went, they pillaged and they robbed and they fathered bastard children. And of course, you had a lot of Jews that came out of Jerusalem that were bastard children between Catholic Crusaders and Jewish women, and they didn't find a home anywhere. And so they became crypto Christians, crypto Jews, whatever they were doing. Either way, basically, you had even more people that had nothing to do with the original Jews. Never mind that the Jews were kicked out of 100 countries, dispersed several times over the last 2,000 years. In all of this time, all of this history I just relayed to you, and certainly there's a lot to go over, but that's beyond the presentation. In all of this time, it is absolute nonsense to believe that there is an unbroken record of an alphabet, of genealogy, that people can trace back their genealogy back to the 12 tribes of Israel. Oh, I'm a Levite. Oh, I'm a, Benjaminite. Oh, I'm a this. No, you're not. Nobody has any clue, folks. There's no records. They've been destroyed. You think God is going to let that, exist? No, the old has been done away with, folks. So all these people that say, oh, he's a Levite, he's, back to David and so on and so forth. This is Jewish fables. Jews love their fables. And so ultimately, the modern Jews have little to nothing to do with biblical Jews or Israelites. You have to realize this. I hate to say it, but you call a spade a spade. It's not being anti-Semitic, it's not being racist, it's not being anything. It's telling you the truth. The God of Judaism is not the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible is sovereign, whereas the God of Judaism, co-creates reality with you. Of course, a lot of them are Kabbalists, so that's another point. The Jews reject the Messiah that was promised to Eve and to Abraham. They don't have a blood sacrifice. It's all works. They don't use even the same alphabet. The alphabet they use is a magical alphabet. And most of them aren't even related to actual Israelites from the 12 tribes. So see my documentary if this is a point that you want to learn more about. But the Kabbalah alphabet is just another piece of evidence that there is a divergence, a significant divergence from biblical Israel by people who call themselves Jews today. because God never gave the Israelites a magical alphabet. They had a pictographic alphabet that was just designed to basically picture concepts, and that way you would know how to pronounce it, how you would know to pronounce the word. So, if the Pharisees, now, critical question, if the Pharisees are the ones who ultimately created this new script to serve their kabbalistic, rabbinic Judaism religion, well, then who are the Pharisees? Well, the Bible tells us very clearly. John 8, verse 44, you are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Boy, who is that addressed to? That's addressed to the Pharisees. Mark 7, verse 10 through 13, for Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father or his mother, whatever you would have gained from me is korban, that is given to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or mother, thus making void the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down, and many such things you do. So tradition is not always a good thing, folks. Matthew 12, verse 33 through 35. Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad, for the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak, for by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. And of course, the Pharisees will be condemned because they rejected Christ, because they're reprobate. They didn't have the ability to believe. Matthew 23, 1 through 36. Woe to the Pharisees and scribes. Let's see. The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, so do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do. So, interesting. They know the law very well, but they don't do it. For they preach, but do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. They do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. And they still do this today, folks. And they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues. Is this still true today? And greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And call no man your father on earth, for you have one Father who is in heaven. That's right, Catholics. You should put this verse to heart, because when you put your attention to somebody calling himself Holy Father who stands in the temple, proclaiming himself to be God and forgiving sins, you are pledging allegiance to the Antichrist. Verse 10, neither be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Christ. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves, nor allow those who would enter to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! For you travel across sea and land to make a single proselyte, and when he becomes a proselyte, you make him twice as much a child of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides, you say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out a gnat and swallowing a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and the plate, and the outside that the outside may also be clean. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in the shedding of the blood of the prophets. Now, really quick break. Do you remember all of the things that we reviewed? That basically they were trying to eliminate things like Isaiah getting cut in half. There's no record of these other than what Jesus says in the New Testament. So obviously there probably was a record that they removed because they didn't want to be associated with this. And so Jesus is calling them out on it. Verse 31. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you brood of vipers. How are you Oh Lord, how are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. This is not in the Old Testament, but it happened. So what's going on? Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. My goodness! If that doesn't tell you who the Pharisees are, then I don't know what does. The conclusion from this is what, folks? That the villains of the story of the New Testament, the main villains of the story of the New Testament who crucified Jesus, are the ones who shaped the versions of our Old Testament today. You need to come to terms with that. The people that I just described through Jesus' words, who are vipers, blind guides, whitewashed tombs, sons of the devil, can't get any worse, folks. These people are the ones who shaped the Old Testament that you're reading today. Their descendants made the Masoretic text and perfected the magical alphabet that we call quote-unquote Hebrew today with their Babylonian kabbalistic traditions to usher in a false golden age and to delegitimize Christ. Modern Hebrews counterfeit Hebrew. It's not real Hebrew. It's just like modern Christianity is not really what Christianity used to be 2,000 years ago. Today, when you see Christian this, Christian that, that's an ecumenical term. Doesn't necessarily mean Christian. In fact, I've talked to a few people now where it's like, there probably will come a point where we might have to even stop calling ourselves Christians, if you can even believe that. Because Christianity has become just this whitewashed, ecumenical new thing, which is NAR, charismatic, one world religion type of thing. Christian this, Christian that. Well, I'm a follower of Jesus. I believe in Jesus Christ. Yeah, the Jesus of the scriptures. Because Christian now means something totally different. Either way, I'm not saying don't call yourself a Christian. I'm just saying it's the same thing with Hebrew. When you say, oh, it's the Hebrew calendar. What do you mean the Hebrew calendar? The Hebrews didn't use that calendar. The Israelites of the Bible didn't use that calendar. You're calling it a Hebrew calendar. It's a counterfeit. It's not Hebrew at all. It's nothing to do with the Hebrews. The Hebrews didn't watch the moon. They watched the position of the sun in accordance with the constellations, and that's very well documented. Of course, that system went out of line, and they picked up a new system in Babylon, just like they pick up the Kabbalah and all the kinds of things. So now that we understand the history of modern Hebrew and how it has nothing to do with real Hebrew, as well as its connection to the people who Christ singles out as the villains, right? The religious spirit. It's time to dig a little deeper into modern Hebrew as a magical alphabet. So on to part 9, the magical alphabet.